Hello, my name's Dawn Vanderstoop and I am a soft pastel artist. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about caring for your original pastel. And also I'll give you a few framing tips along the way. The first thing I do when I'm all done is I will take them off and I will store them in between something called glassine. And it's like a waxy paper, but it's acid free and it helps protect the original piece. And so that will come protected in between in a sandwich on both sides. And then I will take that and I will put it in between a really heavy duty cardboard, and that will be all taped up next. And then when I ship it, I put another piece of cardboard over that. So it comes to you very protected, well cared for, and ready to be framed. If properly cared for, your pastel will last many lifetimes. Pastel is actually one of the most archival mediums out there, and some of them that are even 200 years old look just as bright and new as the day they were created. Now, in the beginning, it might shed a few particles, and that's completely normal. And you should handle your pastel with care. You don't want to touch the surface. And if you're not framing the piece, I would let the framer deal with all of the handling of the pastel because they're used to it. So the other question I get asked very frequently is, do I seal my finished pastel paintings or spray fixative on them when they're done? And no, I don't. I use a special pastel paper that's called a sanded pastel paper, and it grips onto my pastel, and it's made just so you don't have to spray any fixative in the end. You don't, fixative has a tendency where it can change the colors in the end. It can also take away the whites and it can dislodge particles. So you don't want your framer to be spraying any type of fixative or sealer on your piece. The big thing is, pastel is meant to be protected behind glass. Your painting may in the beginning shed a few particles, and that is perfectly normal. Over time, it will basically cure and will no longer shed any particles. So talking about shedding, the possibility of it is basically leads into framing pastel. Why it makes it a little different is the biggest thing is you're basically wanting to create a gap so your pastel painting, if it does shed any particles, will have a place to go and won't be jammed up in between the frame, glass, and the original art, or the matte and the original art. So you always want to give pastel a gap, and that's what makes it so different when you frame it. And those are easy solutions. Once you know them, you'll be like, that's so easy. So if you're framing your pastel painting behind glass without a mat, then what the framer would commonly use is something called a spacer. And this spacer goes in between the glass and the pastel painting. So it is hidden and you won't be able to see it if done properly. So this piece is an example of going all the way to the edges and you're not using a mat. So those spacers are there to keep the original off the glass. And that's a really easy solution to framing your pastel. So if you're wanting to use a mat and give more space around your original pastel, you will do something called a reversed double mat. And that's basically just taking two mats and you're putting the larger opening mat in behind the original opening. So if you had a 9x12, the mat behind it could be a 10x13. And then that would allow a gap in between the painting and the mat, so you wouldn't see anything caught up in between the edge of the mat and the painting, and it would allow some shedding if it happens. So those are two of the basic solutions to framing your pastel painting. And the other one I want to mention is you don't want to use any plexiglass to frame. You want to use real glass because plexiglass can hold a charge, and what it'll do over time is something called ghosting. and it won't harm your painting, but it'll create a static where it'll pull any type of loose particles off of your painting and actually make a little ghost on it. So you want to use glass for framing your pastel, all archival materials, and you also, they're a great option if you can, is to put it behind something called anti-glare glass. It is a little bit more expensive, but this piece is actually created with anti-glare glass and you don't get as much reflection on it. So if you can do that, that's a great option, but regular glass is fine also. So you've got your piece all framed up, you're super excited to hang it up, and what I want to suggest is that you really be mindful and hang it in a place that's out of the direct sunlight. That wouldn't be good to have an original piece always being in the direct sunlight. And some of the glass out there can offer UV protection. And I get an anti-glare glass and it's like 76 UV protection. But I really try to avoid hanging any of my pieces in direct sunlight. So I hope this has helped demystify some of the anxieties behind carrying and framing your original pastel painting. Thank you very much for joining me here today, and I wish you an abundance of joy.